I'm Reiner Fuellmich. I'm a trial lawyer, have been admitted to the German and the California bar for 26 years. And I have, my firm and I have, over these years, mostly represented consumers and small corporations against fraudulent large corporations like VW and Deutsche Bank. And I got into this because a friend of mine asked me to do something about this, and my wife sort of confirmed, yes, you have to do something about it, and that's why we returned from California to Germany in order to take part in the effort of finding out what's really going on. And now that we've more or less gotten a clearer picture, the big thing is to fight what these people are trying to do.
Is your focus on the PCR test?
Yeah, our focus is on the PCR test because if we manage to convince a court of law that this is a fraudulent enterprise, the PCR test being marketed with the assertion that it can detect infections, if we can convince a court of law that this is a false statement, then the whole house of cards is going to come crashing down because there's nothing else. That is the tool that they're using in order to keep people in panic mode, and there's no basis for this panic because, as I just pointed out, even according to the WHO, which couldn't quite escape the conclusions of John Ioannidis, the mortality is or lethality is roughly the same as that of the common flu.
So inconsequential, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
and also there's already herd immunity. That's another thing that has been overlooked. So there's absolutely no reason for vaccines except for the pharmaceutical industry to make money, and probably cause a lot of damage as far as health and even there's probably going to be a lot of fatalities too because these vaccines haven't really been tested properly. Usually it takes between 5 and 7 years to develop a new vaccine, and now this should be done, or they're claiming it can be done in 9 months or so. I don't think so.
And can you comment on your lawsuit you're going to do next week? This will be published.
No, this is not going to be one single lawsuit. It's going to be a number of different lawsuits that are going to be filed both on here in Germany, on this side of the Atlantic, and in the United States. We're here in Germany. We're going to start filing these lawsuits because we're a little bit ahead of the of our American colleagues, even though we've been discussing this for quite a while now in numerous Zoom conferences. But we're a little bit ahead of the pack, and so we're going to start filing these lawsuits here in Germany for damages against people like Drosten, Wheeler, and some of the others.
And can you hold them personally liable?
Oh yeah, because they're the ones that lied. They're the ones who stuck their heads out too far. They're not doing this on their own. They're making money with it, of course, but somebody else is pulling their strings, like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates, who are lurking in the background, so to speak. But we have to start somewhere, and it's going to, the intent is, or the intention that we think is important here, is to uncover the whole thing, to use what we've learned through the Corona Committee, to use these pieces of evidence and the experts that we've heard in order to convince a court of law that this is a staged pandemic and that there's other goals, other people who are behind this and trying to push completely different goals. This has nothing to do with the world's health.
And how does an operation like this work, or how is it structured, do you think?
We don't know, and we don't care. Right now, we don't care. The evidence is going to take us there, in particular if we take advantage of the Anglo-American judicial system. In order to win this case against Drosten, we don't have to know who's behind him. We can see that there's people behind him because he's just not smart enough to pull this off by himself, and neither is Wheeler. And we know from listening to many of these experts that they've been in touch with Wheeler and Drosten have been in close touch with the players behind the field, the pharmaceutical players, like Roche is one of the big pharmaceutical players, or the Wellcome Trust. That's I think Wheeler used to work for them or with them. So we know that there's something in the background, but it's not important for our lawsuit. For our lawsuit, we can concentrate on one thing only. These people lied when they're telling the general public that PCR tests can tell us something about infections.
And how could such a simple deception grow so large with this PCR test?
Because it's the panic. Bobby Kennedy, when he gave a speech here in Berlin on August 29th, that was the largest demonstration that this country has ever had, even though the mainstream media, there were more than 1 million people there. The mainstream media here made this into something of no consequence, like they're telling there's 17,000 people or so that came together. We know, because we had 34 lawyers on the ground, we're cooperating with members of the police force, we know it was way more than 1 million. But he reminded people of something that, not just of what his uncle said some 50 years ago, Ich bin ein Berliner, famous, absolutely famous. Every German will always remember this. But also of a quote of Franklin D. Roosevelt, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to keep everyone in fear by pretending, by using these marionettes like Drosten and Wheeler and Tedros, who's kind of slipped into the background right now, but trying to use fear so that people will believe everyone, even their closest neighbors and relatives, is a danger to them, could be a super spreader, even if they're completely healthy and show no symptoms. That's why I'm saying it's not just a lie about PCR tests can tell us something about infections. In addition, they needed to lie about people can be infectious even if they don't show any symptoms. And that's another thing, because Drosten knows that he's lying. When he first published a preprint, or he wrote a preprint about on January the 30th, about how this woman from Wuhan came to Frankfurt and infected a lot of people without her having any symptoms. That was wrong. There was a journalist by the name of Kai Kupferschmidt who pointed this out and said, hey, this is wrong. This woman did show symptoms because she was taking anti-flu medication. You don't do that if you don't have any symptoms. But still, he published his paper without correcting this. So what you have here is lie number one. There can be infections without symptoms, so that everybody here is afraid of everybody, even though nobody shows any symptoms, nobody is seriously sick. And the second lie is the PCR tests, with their positive results, tell us about infections. And there you have it. That's the stage which is perfect for this panic, which is playing out.
So could you maybe reiterate the first one in a sentence or two, concisely? Like, we were told there was this asymptomatic spreading, and that isn't true. And,
sure.
And that's the basis of masks.
Okay.
Yeah. Just because that's such a big point that I think is lost on a lot of people.
Yeah. So one of the law professors who advises us in the background pointed out to me, in this tort case, there are two really important lies that have to be put front and center. One is PCR tests can tell us something about infections. The truth is it cannot. In particular, not the way these PCR tests, the Drosten tests, are set up, because everybody agrees that if using these PCR tests, you take a swab and then you have these molecules which are invisible to the human eye. So you have to amplify them by putting them into a machine, most of them produced by Roche, and amplifying them in cycles. Anything above 35 cycles, everyone agrees, is completely unusable, doesn't make any sense, it's unscientific. The Drosten test, just like the CDC test, by the way, which used the Drosten test as a blueprint, were set at 45 cycles. Lie number one, you cannot tell anything about infections by using these PCR tests, because what they do is they test positive to almost everything, including, for example, the debris, the fragments of a common cold, of your immune system's fight against a common cold. Lie number two, even more important, I think, is he says that there are asymptomatic infections, which basically means anyone who's surrounding us, our relatives, our friends, and who shows no symptoms, who's perfectly healthy or appears perfectly healthy, could be a threat. That's what that's what this induces. That's what this fraud, there are asymptomatic infections, induces. It tells us, oh my God, everybody could be potentially dangerous. That is not true. And we know that Drosten, when he wrote this in a preprint, knew that it was not true because he was referring to a woman from Wuhan who traveled to Frankfurt and who apparently spread whatever virus she had to a lot of people. And she, he claims, didn't have any symptoms. A journalist pointed out that is wrong. She did have symptoms because she was taking anti-flu medication.
So basically, this is just like the normal flu, where if you're sneezing, coughing, then you're infectious.
Yeah. Unless you show any symptoms, you are not infected. There is, I think, Dr. Mike Yeadon, he found a really great way of defining what an infection is. He says there's a cold infection and there's a hot infection. If a test, whatever test, finds or is positive because it finds some debris, some fragment of your body's prior fight against a common cold, for example, or whatever, that doesn't mean anything if it's just there. Only if a virus enters your cells and then replicates are you contagious. And that's when you have symptoms. Meaning, if you don't have any symptoms, whatever virus is there hasn't done anything, isn't dangerous, is being probably killed by your body's immune system. It's only contagious, it's only infectious in that common sense if it has entered the cells and is replicating. Before that, nothing to worry about.
So if you don't have symptoms, you're not infected and you're not contagious.
Absolutely.
And that's the
big thing, because symptoms is like a sore throat or a headache or diarrhea, whatever.
Just like the normal flu.
Just like the normal flu. That's what it all boils down to, yeah.
Yeah, because it's been really disgusting seeing these things in the media with people walking with blood on the ground and all this this fear.
It's just plain stupid, but it works. If you just like Bobby Kennedy said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. But now we have a lot of fear, and many people have simply decided we're not going to think anymore. We're just going to react to whatever triggers us, whatever they use to trigger us.
And what's your goal with all this? Do you think you can get injunctions on these things, or get?
Yeah, if we're lucky, we're going to get injunctions depending on which court we address. We have had not just lawyers who are trying to help, more and more lawyers who are coming out of hiding more or less, but we've also, the Corona Committee that is, we've also had judges calling us, getting in touch with us and asking us how they can help. They're not intending to bend the law or break the law, but they want to apply the law in order to stop this. So there is going to be lots more pushback than we can see right now.
And are there efforts to change the laws to make that harder? Or?
Yeah, the government is, in fact, they are trying to change the laws because just like in the United States, here in Germany and in Austria, more and more courts have declared governmental decisions which are not based on a parliamentary hearing, on our lawmakers, the ones who we voted into office, deciding about these laws, but simply made up regulations. Many courts of laws, including the Constitutional Court in Austria, the Supreme Courts of Michigan and Wisconsin, a federal court in Pennsylvania, a Superior Court in California, have said you can have, you governor, you can make emergency regulations for a few days, but then you have to get the parliament involved. You have to get the lawmakers involved, and that means you have to have a discussion about the pros and cons. What about the mask? Does it serve any purpose? Is there any other opinion out there that says no, it doesn't serve any purpose? Are they maybe dangerous, in particular to children? Are there any studies out there? That's the kind of discussion that we need to have, and that's one of the things that we want to push as the Corona Committee, a public scientific discussion about what's going on. And that's what the other side, of course, wants to suppress, because once we have this, the results are going to be the same as those that we have had in the Corona Committee, because the people who we have listened to, the witnesses that we have listened to, are basically the same, plus some more, who are going to go to court. So they're not going to change their minds, I don't think.
And have any of the events this year changed your perspective of the world?
Any other events?
The events of this year, is it a...
Oh yeah, the events of this year have, as I said in the beginning, I was not completely surprised to see how governmental functions have been taken over by private corporations. The most important thing, however, and that's something that I'm still quite shocked at, the most important thing is that private companies like YouTube and Facebook are deciding about the range of the freedom of speech. They're the ones who are deciding whether or not somebody's opinion can be heard or not. That cannot be. We have to stop this, because this is a sovereign task. It's up to the courts of law to decide whether some speech is defamation or whatever. But it's not up to private corporations to decide whether or not it is an opinion that is being told to the world through a video is covered by the right to freedom of speech or not. It's us. It's the people who have to decide about this.
So their behavior surprised you?
What surprised me is how careless we have been over the last 10 or maybe 20 years, because the encroachment of our individual rights has been going on for a lot longer. This is just maybe the final stage of this plan, because there is a plan behind this. There must be a plan behind this when it turns out that the pandemic isn't a pandemic, but it's just something like the common flu, and when it turns out these people who are telling us about these PCR tests are lying to us. So the next question, of course, is who's doing this for what purpose?
And what do you think this is heading towards? What do you think's the goal?
From what I've read, and again, this is not important for our lawsuits, but from what I've read and the people who we talk to here on this committee, historians and journalists, this is the so-called Great Reset that some very rich players of the corporate world, including Bill Gates, but also including Klaus Schwab, he's using his World Economic Forum as a meeting forum for the corporate elite, self-appointed corporate elite, and the self-appointed political elite, to influence them, to manipulate them, to basically lobby them. What the goal is, probably population reduction is one of the goals, so that the resources of the world will last longer for those who will survive this. That, in my opinion, is one of the goals, maybe the basic goal.
So control and population, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Some sort of managed reduction, huh?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you can read this. They're not doing this in hiding. It's out there. I mean, I think last week's, was it Newsweek's article? I think their cover shows this eerie, ghostly person, Klaus Schwab, who is one of the people who is behind this.
And what do you say to people that are new to this or skeptical of this, haven't read all this material?
It depends. It depends on who you talk to. Like when we met out there, I was speaking to a cab driver. This guy is intelligent. Intelligence, I think, has nothing to do with if you have a law degree or a degree in medicine. But this guy is intelligent because he's asking questions. He wasn't wearing a mask, which was, to me, an invitation to talk to him, get a conversation going. And he drove me here and took us about 10 minutes. But within these 10 minutes, he began to ask me questions, sort of like what you're doing right now. And he was open-minded. But he was open-minded because he had already begun to ask himself questions. Some of the things that are going on don't make any sense to him, he says. And so I think maybe I got him interested in looking a little deeper and getting more information from the internet, because you can't get them from the mainstream media. As I said, they have been influenced in much the same way by these investors, Bill Gates and others' money, as the pharmaceutical and the tech industries.
And maybe last question is, I don't know, I'm from Washington, D.C., and all the so-called expert intellectual class, they seem to be some of the dumbest in situations like this. Why do you think that is?
What, again?
They fall for these things more, like people...
Intellectuals. Yeah, because they think they're much smarter than they are. I mean, I have some of the people who I went to law school with know everything about the law, because they have learned many of the regulations by heart, many of the decisions by heart. But that's not all. There is another layer of intelligence which many of these people don't have. You have to be able to follow your gut instinct. You have to be able to put the dots together. You have to be able to, I guess what this is called is social intelligence. You have to understand what's going on, not just have a knowledge of certain individual aspects of the law in this case, but you have to be able to see the entire wood and not just one tree.
Like some street smarts.
Street smarts, that comes into play, but it doesn't. In addition, you need to have the factual knowledge. If you're a lawyer, you have to know about the law, but that alone doesn't get you very far. You have to understand. Street smarts is probably good, yeah.
Yeah, because in DC it's like 100% math,
Yeah.
and then but you go into the Midwest and the South, a lot of people are more skeptical. You know?
Yeah, in California, most out where we live, out there in Northern California, most people don't really care. I mean, they do put on their mask if they have to. If they go to, like in Reno, that's the closest larger city to us. If you go to a Walmart or any of the hardware stores, yeah, you put on your mask. But in those smaller towns, people don't care. Neither the shop owners or the employees, they don't care. They don't wear masks.
And do you think some of the changes in demographics of the cities and the countryside, that's a part of this plan or a result of it?
I can't tell. I don't know. It could be a part of this plan, not a result of it, not yet.
It's such a big shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
You really have to change your whole evaluation where you want to live.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I decided I wanted to be away from big cities. But this is not new. I've always been like this. I always felt like I'm being crowded in big cities. I don't like it when too many people are around me, when it's too noisy. I can't stand that. I love to be out in the country where there's only horses and cows and a couple of bears and rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
And my dogs.
Do you have any other comments you'd like to make? Or?
No, I think I said it all.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Huh?
Okay, you're welcome.
Nun doch, nachdem einige Gerichte gesagt haben, hey, das geht doch nicht alles am Gesetzgeber vorbei, die Verbindung zwischen von Wiener und Drosten keine Infektion feststellen können, dann würde das zumindest ein ganz großer Schritt nach vorne sein. Ja. Und jetzt haben wir, ich weiß gar nicht, hast du Frau Professor Kämmerer schon gesagt? Wirklich eine, und er ist ja auch nicht wirklich promoviert, wie inzwischen die neuen
Schule auffällig werden, weil sie irgendwie erkältet sind, Fieber haben oder so.
Die Politiker und zwischen uns und den Politikern entstanden, weil andere Interessen dazwischen grätschen derzeit. Und wie weit das...
Keimerkonzentrationen, die viel zu hoch sind, die Temperaturen, die nicht passen und die Ruhezykluszahlen. Aber in dem Originalprotokoll von ihm...
Infektion macht Symptome. Eine Infektion erkennt man daran, dass sie Symptome macht. Da verändert sich was in den Schleimhäuten, das spüren wir, die Nase geht zu, wir werden heiser oder...